The galaxy's most powerful empire had enslaved countless races, but humanity scattered and weak had been left forgotten, abandoned on the outskirts of known space. The alien fleets had swept across the stars like locusts, devouring worlds, stripping them of resources, and enslaving those who survived, each alien race more technologically advanced than the last, each with their own agenda and sense of superiority. Humanity was just another footnote in the history of the galaxy, a species that had once flourished only to fall into obscurity. Earth itself was no longer even on most star charts, its location hidden in the archives of the invaders as a dead world, long since erased from memory. But humanity had never been truly vanquished, not entirely. The Empire had never truly understood the resilience of the human spirit, and on the edge of the galaxy, in a hidden system tucked away among the nebula, the last remnants of humankind had been biding their time, waiting for their moment of reckoning. Kira stood in the control room of a once ancient human ship that had been hidden beneath the sands of a forgotten world. This ship was their secret weapon, and Kira knew its power would change everything. She had heard the stories from the elders from the time before the fall of Earth, the time when humanity had dominated the stars with their creativity and their courage. Kira had always wondered if those stories were true or just legend, but now she knew the truth. The Empire's fleet was coming this way, and they were vastly outnumbered. The rebels had no choice but to strike before it was too late. The ship was only a fraction of what it had once been capable of, but with a little ingenuity, they had managed to make it operational once again. She turned to her team, her eyes burning with determination. This was it. This was their chance. The ship's engines powered up with a low hum that reverberated through the steel walls. They were ready, and Kira could feel the tension in the air. The comms crackled as the voice of her second-in-command echoed through the room. "We've detected the Empire's fleet. It's only a few hours out." Kira nodded and turned to the navigation console. Her fingers danced over the controls, setting their course towards the heart of the Empire's territory. The ship would have to be fast. They couldn't afford to be caught in open space, not with the alien forces bearing down on them. They had to hit them where it would hurt the most, the last known supply line to the Empire's central hub. The humans had spent years building their forces in secret, gathering intelligence, and now it was time to make their move. A small fleet of human ships launched from the hidden base, their destination set for the heart of enemy space. And with each passing second, Kira could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This was more than just a fight for survival. This was for everything that had been lost, for the future of the human race. They had been underestimated for too long, and now it was time to show the galaxy that humanity was not done yet. They were not going to go down quietly. They were going to fight, and they were going to win. As Kira's fleet made its way deeper into enemy territory, the weight of their mission grew heavier each passing moment. The vastness of space seemed to swallow them whole. The ships were small compared to the Empire's mighty armadas, but their speed and stealth would give them the advantage. They hoped. Kira's mind raced with the possibilities of what could go wrong. She had seen too many good people lost over the years, and now the fate of humanity rested on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to fail. As they neared the enemy supply line, the tension among the crew was palpable. The usual chatter had quieted, and everyone knew what was at stake. The first strike had to be perfect. There was no room for error. A single misstep could expose their entire position to the Empire. The rebels had done everything they could to prepare for this moment, but they were still outgunned and outnumbered. Every ship in their fleet was a relic from humanity's past, each one a piece of history, a reminder of what they had lost, but also a symbol of their resilience. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to reclaim their legacy and prove that humanity had not been forgotten or erased from the stars. Kira stood at the helm of the lead ship, her hands steady on the controls. As they approached the supply station, she could see it now, a massive space station surrounded by a ring of warships and automated defense drones. The Empire had been using it as a base of operations to supply its forces throughout the galaxy. It was heavily guarded, but Kira had a plan. It was time to hit them fast and hard. The human fleet split into smaller groups, each one taking a different angle of attack. They would hit the Empire where it least expected it. The plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. As the first wave of rebels launched their assault, Kira watched as the Empire's defenses scrambled into action. They had been caught off guard. The humans had infiltrated their security systems and disabled the station's primary weapons. In one swift strike, the surprise attacks sent the enemy scrambling, and the rebels pushed forward without hesitation. The human ships danced through the void, their old engines roaring, as they moved with the agility of predatory animals, weaving in and out of enemy fire. The Empire's ships were massive and intimidating, but they were slow to react against the smaller, more nimble human vessels. One by one, the rebels disabled the station's shields and launched precise strikes against its critical systems. Explosions rocked the station as the Empire's forces fought to regain control. But the humans were relentless. They struck fast, they struck hard, and they were everywhere. The Empire's commanders had underestimated them once again, thinking they were dealing with a primitive species incapable of organizing such an attack. But humanity's greatest strength was not in their weapons or their ships. It was in their ability to adapt and improvise on the fly. The first wave of rebel ships broke through the station's defenses, and the rest of the fleet followed in their wake. The Empire's defenses faltered as they tried to reorganize, but it was too late. Kira's fleet had breached the heart of the Empire's supply line, and the rebellion had begun. The station was in chaos. The explosions reverberated through the walls, and the once smooth operations of the Empire turned into a frantic scramble. As alarms blared across the facility, the rebel forces moved with surgical precision, striking down enemy patrols and disabling the station's vital systems. Kira's fleet had torn through the enemy's defenses like a wildfire, spreading in every direction. And now the Empire's once unstoppable stronghold was slowly falling apart. The rebels had the upper hand, but they knew it wouldn't last long. The Empire's reinforcements would be on their way soon. The human ships raced through the corridors of the station, their cannons firing on anything that moved. Every hallway they passed became another battleground, every room a reminder of what they were fighting for. Kira's heart pounded in her chest as she led her team deeper into the station. They had one target left: the central command room, where the last of the Empire's control systems were housed. If they could take that down, the Empire would lose their grip on this sector, and the rebels would have a fighting chance. The humans moved quickly and silently, working together like a single organism. They had trained for years for moments like this, and now it was paying off. The central command room was heavily guarded, but the humans had something the Empire didn't. They had the element of surprise. The guards never saw them coming. As the rebels moved in, Kira's squad infiltrated the room with ease, setting explosives on the main console and cutting down the few soldiers that were left standing. Kira didn't hesitate, her eyes locked onto the main control panel. As her team planted the final charges, they were almost done, but they could feel the Empire's response coming. The reinforcements were already on the way. Kira counted down in her mind, and then with a deafening blast, the central command room was destroyed. The shockwave rippled through the station, and the lights flickered as the system's mainframe crashed. The Empire's control over the station had been severed, and now the rebels controlled it. Kira stood amidst the wreckage of the command center, her breathing heavy but steady. She knew this was only the beginning. They had struck a devastating blow to the Empire, but they had also made themselves a target. The Empire would retaliate with everything it had, and the battle for this sector was far from over. Still, the first victory was theirs, and it would send a message across the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The human fleet withdrew from the station in tight formation, their ships leaving the wreckage behind as they prepared for their next move. But even as they made their escape, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had shifted the balance of power. It was no longer just a war for survival, it was a war for the galaxy's future. The Empire would come for them, but Kira knew one thing for certain: they would be ready. The rebellion had been ignited, and it was only going to grow stronger. The fleet moved swiftly through the void, leaving the shattered station behind. But even in the calm of space, Kira could feel the weight of the victory pressing on her mind. It had been a crucial blow to the Empire, but it had come with a cost. The rebels had lost several ships in the attack, and many of their crew were wounded. Still, they had gained something far more valuable than they could have ever expected. They had proven to the Empire that humanity was still a force to be reckoned with. The war was far from over, and now they had a spark to fuel the fire of rebellion across the galaxy. Kira stood on the bridge of the lead ship, gazing out into the vast expanse of stars, her hands clasped behind her back. As she thought about the next step, they had to keep moving, keep fighting. They couldn't afford to slow down or risk letting the Empire regroup. It was clear that the Empire would retaliate with everything it had in an attempt to crush them once and for all. But Kira wasn't afraid. The humans had always thrived in adversity. It was in their nature to rise when all seemed lost, and she was certain that no matter how powerful the Empire thought it was, humanity would find a way to overcome the odds. As they passed through the outer rim of the galaxy, Kira received a message from one of her commanders. The rebels had begun to spread the word of their victory, and soon more planets were rallying to their cause. There were whispers of resistance movements forming across multiple systems, and Kira knew that the rebellion was growing stronger with every passing day. The Empire would be forced to take notice. The galaxy was beginning to awaken, and humanity was leading the charge. Their next target was a major supply hub, one that the Empire relied on to feed its war machine. If they could take it out, it would cripple the enemy's ability to wage war in this region. The mission would be dangerous, but the rebels had proven that they were capable of pulling off the impossible. Kira turned to her tactical officer. "We'll hit them fast and hard, no hesitation." "Understood," the officer replied. Kira didn't need to say more. Everyone on this ship knew the stakes, she knew the risks, but she also knew that there was no turning back now. The rebellion was not just about fighting for survival. It was about taking back control of their future. The fleet made its jump through hyperspace, and within hours, they were on the edge of the Empire's next stronghold. The supply hub loomed ahead like a fortress in the darkness, a massive structure orbiting a barren world. Kira's heart raced as she stayed at the looming station. It was heavily fortified and would be a challenge to infiltrate, but the humans were used to challenges. They thrived in the face of impossible odds. The fleet spread out as they neared the station, preparing for the attack. Kira looked out at the vastness of space once more as a wave of determination surged through her. It was time to take another step forward. The galaxy was watching, and humanity would not fail. The fleet slowed as they approached the supply hub. The massive station loomed ahead like a silent predator waiting in the darkness, its exterior covered in layers of reinforced armor and automated defense turrets designed to repel any attackers. The Empire had fortified the station to withstand even the most determined assaults, but Kira knew this was no ordinary enemy. This was humanity fighting for its survival, and their will to resist was stronger than anything the Empire could throw at them. They had already taken the first step toward freedom, and now they had to finish what they had started. Kira stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the station. As she gave orders to her fleet, they would strike fast and precise, using the element of surprise to their advantage. The Empire would never expect them to attack so soon after their previous assault, and that would give them the edge. She turned to her tactical officer. "Bring us into range. We won't give them a chance to react. Prepare the fighters, and make sure the rest of the fleet stays out of sight until we give the signal." "Understood," came the reply. Kira felt a rush of adrenaline as she watched the supply hub grow larger in the viewport. The stakes had never been higher. The galaxy was watching their every move, and the rebellion depended on them. She could feel the weight of it all, but she pushed the fear aside, focusing only on the mission. The station was vital to the Empire's ability to control this sector. If they could disable it, the Empire would be crippled for months, maybe longer, and humanity would have a real chance at victory. Kira signaled to her commanders to begin the assault. The rebel ships moved quickly through the darkness of space, weaving in and out of the station's defense grid. As they made their approach, the station's automated weapon systems came online. But it was too late. The rebels had already breached the outer perimeter. The first wave of fighters launched from Kira's fleet, cutting through the enemy's defenses with pinpoint accuracy. They focused on the station's power core, a series of massive reactors that powered the entire facility. With each successful strike, the station trembled, and the lights inside flickered. The Empire was caught off guard. They had underestimated humanity once again. As the first wave of rebel ships dealt heavy damage, the second wave arrived, using their smaller ships to strike at the heart of the station's communication array. If they could disable the Empire's ability to call reinforcements, it would ensure their success. The Empire's forces scrambled to react, but it was too late. The humans had already infiltrated the station's internal systems, planting charges along key infrastructure points and disabling weapon systems. Across the board, Kira's fleet was in control. The station was theirs to take. The last defense was a large contingent of elite soldiers sent by the Empire to hold the line, but the rebels were relentless. They had trained for years for this moment. They knew their enemy better than anyone, and their strategy was flawless. As the final battles unfolded inside the station, Kira led the charge with her squad, breaking through the remaining resistance. She could hear the sounds of conflict echoing through the station, but she kept moving forward, her eyes focused on the prize, the final objective, the power core. With one final strike, they would bring the station to its knees and deliver another blow to the Empire that they would never forget. Kira and her squad pushed forward deeper into the heart of the supply hub. The sounds of blaster fire and explosions echoed throughout the station, reverberating off the cold metal walls. Each step they took was one closer to victory. But the Empire's elite soldiers were waiting. They had fortified the final sector, and Kira knew this would be the most dangerous part of the mission. They were nearly at the power core, and she could feel the weight of the moment on her shoulders. But she could not afford to hesitate. The fate of the rebellion rested on this strike. Their progress slowed as they encountered heavy resistance. The Empire had anticipated this move and had set up defenses at every corridor. Kira gave orders to her team to split into smaller groups, taking different routes to the core. She had learned long ago that when facing an enemy like the Empire, adaptability was key, and she was confident her team could handle it. The air was thick with tension as the squad moved forward, staying low and taking out any Empire soldiers in their way. Their movements were fast, calculated. Each member of the team was a well-oiled machine working together seamlessly. It was a testament to the years of training they had endured. But the further they went, the more they could sense the gravity of what was happening. This wasn't just a raid, it was the first wave of a much larger offensive. It was a message to the Empire and to the galaxy that humanity was back, and it was ready to fight. Kira reached the final stretch of the corridor, and as she approached the power core, she saw the enemy forces massing ahead. They had set up a barricade and were ready to defend their last line of defense. But Kira wasn't backing down. She took a deep breath and gave the signal to her team to attack. The battle erupted into chaos as the rebels clashed with the Empire's elite soldiers. The sounds of blasters firing and the smell of burning metal filled the air. But Kira fought with the same focus and determination she had carried all her life. She knew what was at stake. They couldn't let the Empire hold this ground. The future of the rebellion depended on this victory. Kira's squad fought their way through the enemy forces with brutal efficiency. But even as they gained ground, the Empire's soldiers kept coming. They were relentless and well-trained, but they were also overwhelmed. The sheer number of rebels pouring into the station began to tip the scales. The tide of battle turned as Kira and her squad finally reached the power core, the center of the station. It was heavily guarded, but Kira had one last trick up her sleeve. She had brought a special charge, one that could bypass the station's primary defenses and cripple the power core in a matter of seconds. She took the charge in hand and moved to place it at the core's base. As her team provided cover fire, Kira could hear the sounds of battle raging around them, but she remained focused on her task. The charge clicked into place, and she activated it. The core began to hum with energy, and then there was a flash, a violent explosion that shook the entire station. The power core went critical, and the station began to shudder. The Empire's last hold in this sector was collapsing. Kira took a moment to look around at her team. They were battered but victorious. They had struck the heart of the Empire, and now it was time to lead. The rebellion had won another battle, but the war was far from over. The station groaned as it began to break apart. The power core had exploded with devastating force, sending shockwaves through the entire structure. Alarms blared throughout the station, signaling its impending collapse. Kira knew they didn't have much time. The rebels had achieved their goal, but now they had to get out before the station was reduced to rubble. She gave the order to retreat, and the squad began making their way back toward their ships. The corridors were filled with smoke and debris, the air thick with the scent of burning metal. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the station, but the humans moved with purpose. They had trained for this moment, and they knew exactly what to do. As they ran through the hallways, Kira couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The Empire had lost another stronghold, and humanity had taken another step toward reclaiming the galaxy, but even as she felt the rush of victory, she knew the fight was far from over. The Empire would send reinforcements, and the next battle would be even harder than the last. She had no illusions about the road ahead. The rebellion was still outnumbered and outgunned, but they had the heart and determination to win. The Empire had underestimated them before, and it would make the same mistake again. The rebels reached the hangar bay and found their ships waiting for them. The fleet had already begun to mobilize, preparing to leave the station before the explosion reached critical mass. But there was still work to be done. Kira and her team boarded their vessel and took their positions. The ship was already powered up and ready to go. The moment the rest of the fleet jumped to hyperspace, they would follow close behind. They didn't have the luxury of slowing down, not with the Empire likely already on their way. But as they prepared to leave the station, Kira took a moment to look out the viewport. She could see the glowing remnants of the supply hub slowly falling apart in the distance. The once mighty station, now a broken shell drifting in space. The devastation was a testament to what the rebels had achieved, but also a reminder of what was to come. The Empire would retaliate. It always did, but the message had been sent. The galaxy was waking up, and humanity was at the forefront of the fight. Kira sat back in her seat and took a deep breath as she gave the signal for the fleet to jump. The ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving the shattered station behind them. The rebels had won another victory, but there was no time to rest. The next battle was already on the horizon, and Kira knew that each victory brought them closer to their final goal, the liberation of the galaxy from the Empire's oppressive grip. As the stars streaked by outside, Kira felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The rebellion was growing stronger with every battle, but so was the Empire's resolve. The war would not be won easily, but Kira had come to believe that humanity could do the impossible. They always had before, and she wasn't about to stop now. The fight for freedom had only just begun. The fleet emerged from hyperspace into the dark expanse of a new system. Kira sat in silence on the bridge, staring at the holographic map of their next target. The rebels had been successful in their last strike, but that didn't mean they were safe. The Empire was relentless, and they would stop at nothing to destroy them. Kira knew the next few days would be critical. The Empire would be reeling from their recent losses and would be looking for a way to strike back. They couldn't afford to give them that chance. Instead, they had to keep the pressure on and hit the Empire where it hurt the most. Kira turned to her fleet commanders, gathering them for a strategy meeting. The room was filled with a quiet urgency. As they gathered around the table, there was no time for pleasantries. Every decision from here on out would have to be precise and calculated. We need to strike their supply lines again, Kira said, breaking the silence. The Empire relies on these routes to keep their forces fueled and supplied. If we can cripple them once more, we'll force them to divide their resources, making them weaker. A commander nodded in agreement. They'll be scrambling to regroup after our last victory. If we hit hard and fast, we might be able to catch them off guard again. We'll need to choose our target carefully. Kira's mind raced through the possibilities, her eyes scanning the data as it updated on the table in front of her. Their intelligence had been solid so far, but they had to take risks. The supply routes were vast and scattered across the galaxy. Some were guarded more heavily than others, but none were invulnerable. They just had to find the right one. Kira looked up from the table and met the eyes of her commanders. We take the one at the edge of the sector, the one with the fewest defenses. It's a risk, but if we succeed, we'll have a major strategic advantage. The commanders nodded and preparations began immediately. The fleet was ready for another fight. They were more determined than ever after the success of the previous strike, and Kira knew they would do whatever it took to win the next battle. Hours later, the rebel fleet was once again on the move, traveling toward their target. In the quiet vastness of space, the tension was palpable. Each ship in the fleet felt the weight of what was about to happen. They had become skilled at moving quickly through enemy territory, but this time would be different. The Empire would not be caught off guard again. They would be prepared this time. They had to move even faster with even more precision. As the fleet neared their target, the station appeared on their screens, a massive supply depot, located just within the edge of the sector. It was poorly guarded, but not without its defenses. Still, the rebels had the element of surprise on their side, and they intended to use it to their advantage. Kira gave the order, and the fleet descended toward the station with lightning speed. The rebels launched their fighters, first attacking the outer defenses and disabling the enemy turrets before the larger ships arrived. The station's automated weapon systems fired back. But the rebels had anticipated this and swiftly took them offline. The fleet moved in quickly, launching coordinated strikes against the power core and critical systems. They worked as one seamless force, hitting fast and hard, overwhelming the station's meager defenses with sheer numbers and speed. The Empire's forces scrambled to respond, but the rebels were already in control. The station was theirs before the Empire had a chance to mount a full defense. The human fighters tore through the station's shield and cut off all communications. Kira watched as the station began to fall into chaos. Another strike against the Empire, another victory for the rebellion. The station was in full chaos now. Explosions rocked the interior as the rebel fleet tore through the remaining defenses. Every step of the Empire's control was being taken away from them. The once mighty supply depot was now crumbling under the force of the human assault. Kira stood at the bridge of her ship, watching as her fighters swept through the station like a swarm of locusts, dismantling everything in their path. The Empire's response was slow and disorganized. They had not expected this kind of resistance, and now it was too late. Kira's heart raced with anticipation. The victory was nearly theirs, but she knew better than to get complacent. They had faced the Empire's wrath before, and it always came crashing down harder the next time. She didn't let her guard down. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. Her fleet had done its part now. It was time to make sure the station was fully disabled. The core had to be taken out. The Empire had made its last stand in this sector, and they would not let it stand. Kira issued orders to her squad to infiltrate the central control room. There was still a small contingent of Empire soldiers holed up there, and they were holding the key to preventing total destruction of the station. The rebels moved quickly through the hallways, the sounds of battle still echoing around them, but there was a clear goal in mind. Nothing could stand in their way. As they reached the control room doors, Kira could feel the tension rise. The Empire soldiers inside had no idea what was coming for them. They were trapped, and they knew it. Kira motioned for her team to advance, and the door opened with a swift kick. The rebels rushed in, guns raised, and a flash of blasters lit the room. The remaining soldiers didn't stand a chance. They tried to fight, but the rebels were faster and more coordinated. Their blasters hit true, every shot precise. As they cleared the room, Kira moved toward the central console. As the rest of her team secured the area, the console flickered to life, and Kira immediately began typing in the override code. She had memorized every detail of this mission, every step of the plan, and now it was all coming together. She could hear the hum of the station around her, the life support systems beginning to fail, and the energy grid shutting down, but the power core still remained intact. The countdown had begun. Kira reached the last line of code and pressed the final key. A blinding light filled the control room, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The power core was destabilizing. The station's core had been breached, and now it was only a matter of time before the whole facility would collapse. She turned to her squad. "We've done it. The Empire's hold on this sector is finished," she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. The station would no longer serve as a fortress for the enemy. As the last of the rebels cleared the control room, Kira knew their work wasn't over. The rebels had made another mark on the Empire, but the war was far from won. There were still more battles to fight and more victories to claim. Kira led the team back to their ships. As the station shuddered around them, the countdown was nearly complete, and it was time to leave. The Empire would not forget this strike, and Kira knew they would be coming for them soon. But the rebellion had proven one thing beyond all else: humanity was not a race to be underestimated. They would fight until the last breath, and when the war was over, they would be the ones standing victorious. The fleet made its escape as the station finally succumbed to its fate. The explosion rippled through the cold expanse of space, a brilliant flash of light that marked the end of the Empire's stronghold in this sector. Kira watched from the bridge, her eyes fixed on the distant glow, as the station was reduced to a cloud of debris. The mission had been a success, but there was no time to celebrate. The war was far from over. The Empire would retaliate. They always did, and the rebels had only just begun to gather the strength they needed to push back for good. Kira turned to her crew. "We move fast," she ordered. "No delays. We need to regroup and plan our next move." The fleet was already plotting a course to the next system. They had a brief window of opportunity before the Empire could bring reinforcements into the sector, and they had to make the most of it. Kira knew that the war would not be won with just one victory. Each battle would bring its own challenges and dangers. But this was the kind of fight humanity was built for. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they always found a way to rise up stronger. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, and as the stars stretched into streaks of light, Kira allowed herself a moment of reflection. The rebellion had grown stronger with every strike. They had made their presence known across the galaxy, and the Empire could no longer ignore them. Kira's mind drifted back to the beginning of it all, to the days when humanity had been scattered across the galaxy, struggling to survive under the Empire's crushing grip. But now they were a force to be reckoned with. They had allies new and old, and they were united in their fight for freedom. The rebellion was more than just a collection of ships and soldiers. It was a symbol of hope for every planet that had been oppressed and every system that had fallen under the Empire's control. The Empire had underestimated humanity before, and they would do so again. Kira knew that humanity's strength came not just from their weapons, but from their unbreakable will, their ability to adapt to the harshest of circumstances and rise up in the face of adversity. The next few months would be crucial as they continued to strike at the Empire's supply lines and weaken their grip on the galaxy. Every victory brought them closer to their final goal, the liberation of the galaxy. But Kira knew that there would be heavy losses. Along the way, there always were in war, but the rebellion would carry on because they had something the Empire could never take away: their belief in a better future for all. Kira looked out the viewport once more as the stars passed by. The rebellion was far from over, but humanity had proven that they would never stop fighting. As long as there was breath in their lungs, they would keep pushing forward. And when the final battle came, they would stand united and victorious, ready to take back their galaxy from the Empire's cold grip.